Welcome today to the show. My guest is Joan Chad, and she's written this great book with Tony Silbert, Healing Conversations Now, Enhance Relationships with Elders and Dying Loved Ones. Welcome to the show, Joan, and I want to start out with a quote that I found. Knowing our elders better, we discover and know more of ourselves. I found that so profound. I can't wait to talk about the book, but will you start with that quote? How can we know ourselves better when we get to know somebody else better?
Well, my experience, the core experience, well, one of the two core experiences that led to me writing the book was getting to know my aunt better. And as I knew her, I saw reflections of myself. Some of them I'd go, ooh, I think I want to change that. I don't want to go into old age with that particular behavior. Or others, I would say, I'm like her in this way, and how can I use that to enrich my life and enrich her life too? So it's the other person is the reflection, and you're the reflection, and it's this lovely back and forth. And sometimes to tell you what you don't want to do, and sometimes to go, I didn't realize I had that resource.
So let's go deeper into that for just a minute, because I think this may be a new concept. And for those of us that have heard this before, I still want to go deeper. Yeah. When we talk about reflecting, and I've heard it mirroring as well. Mm-hmm. So when you and I are having this conversation, are you saying that I need to be open enough to see myself in you?
Well, if you want to get closer and if you want to be a little further along on your own journey, that would be a good idea.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And so what that means, I think, is that you have to learn to listen really deeply, right?
And you have to really, I think one of the things that's so important in this kind of relationship is that you listen, and you can listen without judging either the other person or yourself. And it really means loving. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have to love yourself and say, wow. Let me give you an example. Mm-hmm. I have an aunt who, I don't know, somehow, I think from our family history, she learned to be frightened of everybody. And so there's little trust. And one of the things would be funny, she lives in a retirement home, and I'd say, well, who do you know here? And she said, oh, I just know everybody. We say hello as we walk down the hall. And for her, that's relationship. And I watched her world get smaller and smaller. And I thought, I don't want that to happen to me. Mm. And I also don't want to judge her because of that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is what she learned. It's what she believes. It's what she's held on to. She's not a person who's done a lot of introspection. So I want to love her just as she is and realize, I love me the way I am, but I'm going to have a lot more fun in life if I totally change that part of me that shields me from other people. And I actually did that many years ago, and my life has changed dramatically.
Well, and we're going to talk about that. I want to get into how your life's changed, but I've got tons of notes, so I'm just going to go through and ask some questions, because there was another quote, or somewhere in the book I read, that there was someone in their 80s who said, I'm wise. Why does nobody just ask me a question? And we used to really respect the elders. I don't know if it's a cultural piece. You go to other cultures, Asia, Central America, plenty of cultures where we honor and seek wisdom and guidance from those older than ourselves. What's happened, and do we care?
Let's start with what's happened. And of course, this is my conjecture. I've really become aware that it takes time. We really need to stop, look into the other person's eyes, and take a breath and be ready to receive them. As well as, first you need to recognize there's something there to receive, so that's number one. But it does take time to do that. And I think sometimes in this hurried life that we live, it may take a person may tell you what you need to know in a story. And that story may take some time. And, it's like, get to the point, get to the point. Well, if you go there, you're not going to hear. And so I think part of it is a time factor. We've gotten so we rush. We don't take time to be with each other. And elders may take even more time. Do we care? I think the issue is, do we even recognize that these people who, they lived without the technology that we have, they lived in so many ways differently from us. Sometimes we don't recognize what they have to teach us or to share with us. And so we don't care unless we know the possibilities and the richness that is there.
Your book, Healing Conversations Now, is great for introverts, anyone who wants more intimate relationship, anyone who wants to heal a relationship with someone that's maybe dying or they've had confrontation with, or does this work for things like divorce and so forth?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I think it would work with divorce if you had done some work, inner. So a lot of what I think about is you have to be willing to forgive. And earlier you asked in the interview about can you learn, how do you project and learn from each other? If you're willing to say, what did I learn from this relationship and what did I gain from it? Which is a really important thing to do no matter how bad it was. You can then appreciate the person enough that you can make the heart space so that you can be non-judgmental enough to then connect with them. But you have to want it. Relationship, which is more important? Me hanging on to my story of how he literally pulled the rug out from under my feet after 7 years, or that we're both parents of children, and I do want to know who he is now in a way that I never knew when he was married or when we were married.
Right.
So I have to want it and do the forgiveness work for myself and him, or her if you happen to be married to a woman. And then the same principles would work.
Now you go through in this book specific steps, and you both show through story, but also you give real practical steps about how to really have healing conversations. And we touched on one of the steps that I think is so important, and I want you to just talk about it a little bit more, which is deep listening, active listening. We're sort of like, oh yeah, I know that. And we're in such a hurry. So explain to me what deep active listening really is.
Okay. I also call it connected listening.
Right, connected listening. I love that. That's right.
It's all of those. And so the intention with connected listening, there are two intentions. One of them is for us to connect heart to heart. And the other is so that I really understand you. So let me talk about what it's not. It's not necessarily about gaining more information. It's not about me making sure you know what I'm saying. It's really about me hearing what's the message under the message. How are you seeing the world? Because I can't connect with you as well unless I get a sense of your perception of the world. So that's one piece. The other piece of it is that we make assumptions. You talked about just, we make assumptions. And I find myself doing this every day, even though I teach it all the time. It's so frustrating. We make assumptions about what the person means. And what I found is if I will just ask questions and then just, again, become an open vessel, then I really hear what the person was trying to say.
That sort of made a light bulb go off in my head because I've been married like more than 3 decades, right?
Wow.
And it's easy for my husband to say something and I jump to, oh, I know exactly what he's going to say. I know where he's going with this. I might even roll my eyes and go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And you sort of put the light bulb in that having intimacy doesn't necessarily mean 3 decades of marriage. You have to slow down and not do that assumption that you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Do I understand you correctly? So these tools will help someone like me as well as somebody in brand new relationship or wanting to heal a relationship.
And a lot of what I teach, some of it comes from Ruiz, who wrote The Four Agreements. Mm-hmm. And, you know, two of them, one of them is don't make assumptions. Mm-hmm. And I just loved that so much because it put into some wonderful words something I've been teaching since the 80s, which is, you know, there's what the person says, and then there's our emotional reaction. But between those two, there's our interpretation. Mm-hmm. And that's where the assumptions and the expectations. And so in healing conversations, it's being aware of that gap of interpretation, taking a step back and reminding ourselves to really, in that gap, ask, what are they saying? Rather than just reacting to what they're saying.
I know a tiny bit of your personal story, and I love how you applied these principles into your own story. Would you mind just going deep and tell us how you found the love of your life at this stage in your life?
Well, I would love to. It goes back to earlier when I talked about my aunt. Mm-hmm. And that I saw that her world was really smaller and smaller and closed. And I made, because of her, I'm so thankful to her, I made the decision I didn't want to do that. And so I really started working on opening my heart and opening my willingness to connect with people and my ability. And I had created this great group of friends and network of friends. And it had been a really long time since I'd had a relationship. So I just assumed that my life was this wonderful group of friends and colleagues, and it was a very happy life. And then this wonderful man, Chuck, came knocking at my door, actually my internet door, and it was really by asking questions, being curious, not making assumptions but checking them out, and with the intention of connecting with each other. Mm. One of the things he wrote to me very early was, I don't remember my question, but I remember his answer. And it was, instead of thinking about even what's best for you, Joan, I'm always going to think about what will nurture our relationship.
Ooh, I love that.
Because one of the things I like about the process of healing conversations now is that you can do it if you just want to. For example, people who work with the elderly and have just a couple minutes can do it on a more superficial, a personality level. You can do it in a relationship that's pretty good. Well, you were talking about your marriage. You can use healing conversations to enhance, to deepen the intimacy between you. You can also use it when there's been some kind of a rift. One of the lovely stories that's in the book is a friend of mine had an uncle who everybody had admired when she was a kid, and when she was 10 he turned off. He just said, I'm leaving the family. Wow. But so everybody had died. When her mother died, she called him, but he said he was sorry, but he didn't come to the funeral, and she knew he lived across the country. And she decided to have a healing conversation with him, even though all this had happened. Mm-hmm. She went through all sorts of things to find him and discovered that he really had made a mistake and that he had been longing to connect, but was so ashamed of having turned off and closed out his family that he hadn't been able to make the first step. And she found him when he was in a nursing home. He was depressed. And his daughter said that after the conversation with my friend Lucille, he perked up. Lucille went to see him. He went outside in a wheelchair for the first time. Mm. And she got back from him what she had always wanted. I mean, there are lots of stories about ending. I mean, I love the story. The people who shared their stories in the book have just given such a gift to all of us who read them.
The piece that strikes me about that story in particular, and some other things that you say in the book, is it's both sides. So I may come to you to mend a relationship or because I want a deeper, more intimate relationship, but it ends up transforming both sides of the relationship.
Yes.
Even if only one person's doing the listening.
Isn't that an interesting piece?
Mm-hmm.
I think about that a lot because, we think of conversation as give and take. And what I've come to, at least my latest understanding, is that even if one of us is not speaking and only listening, that's what we're doing verbally. But in our heart and in our energetic field, we're very active, we're being receptive, we're being connected. And so we're both active, even if only one of us is talking.
Right.
These are not easy conversations, the mending ones.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had people say to me, you want me to ask my family those kinds of questions? And people a lot of times need support, which is sometimes what we do in the coaching, is help them form the questions ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That helps. At least they feel like they have a script.
Mm-hmm.
And then really working with these skills of listening and not being defensive, being the open vessel.
And you mentioned coaching and that you help people put together questions. And I know you teach classes and classes with Chuck and workshops and all kinds of cool things.
Yep.
Might as well mention it now at joanchad.com, and they can get the book there and find out everything you're doing. Do you find that, does it really matter if you script out the questions? Is it important for us to kind of go in knowing what we're going to say, or is it different for each person?
I think the answer is yes and yes. Sometimes if you're not used to asking this, it's a special kind of question.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not used to asking those kinds of questions, some people have asked for little cheat sheets, if you will, or little booklets, because the question is really powerful. The question focuses the attention of the people. So if your question, you want to make sure your question is focusing on what's going to help build the relationship,
right,
or mend the relationship.
Right.
And in the moment, if you're not real used to doing it, you might get scared and you might skittle off. Or you might just go like, ooh, how are they going to respond? And then you forget. So if you have the question scripted, to start with at least, it helps.
Yeah, because I wrote a note about that. I'm just looking. Something about the format of the question. This is what I wrote, is that you help, the format of the question is so important.
Yes.
Right? And so that I like what you just said. Well, I could imagine that I could formulate a question in the heat of the moment that would raise someone else's defenses if I wasn't really thinking clearly, right? Like, how dare you do that? Right? That probably is not a formulated question that fosters healing.
I want to add something, is that you can also go to the website healingconversationsnow.com and get some of this information.
I know that you take people through this process of formulating questions, and you will definitely help. But if I'm ready to go tomorrow and have a conversation with someone, what advice can you give me about formulating a few questions?
Well, first of all, when you're thinking about the questions, remember you're focusing on getting to know the other person's point of view and how they see the world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The other thing is the questions really are asking about positive experiences, because the questions, particularly in the beginning, are building bridges. So they're asking for best experiences that will bring the person to life.
Mm-hmm.
So I have seen people who, actually a woman who was in pain, and when her nephew was there, and when I asked her to talk about stories of when he was a boy, the pain seemed to disappear, And she was a little tiny thing, like 4'11". She ended up in his lap. And they were just holding each other because of the question I had asked. She wanted to go to bed, but instead I asked her.
I read that story in the book, or a similar story about.
It's in there, but
yeah.
So that's one thing that happens. The other part of it is you ask for a story. Because if I just give you a list of things, it's like da da da, it comes from my head. But when I tell you a story, I'm engaging all the senses and the feelings, and you're able to visualize. And as we tell our stories, we relive them.
Mm-hmm.
So particularly if it was a positive story, I'll start feeling better. I'll start feeling more energized.
Sure. I'm just going to hold it up again. Healing Conversations Now, enhance relationships with elders and dying loved ones, but not only will it help you there, it will help you in all your relationships. Joan, I want to mention your website again, joanchad.com. And of course, the book's available at Amazon and also healingconversationsnow.com. If you Google it, they'll find it, right? And you offer workshops and classes and coaching both with and without your partner, Chuck. What else would you like to leave us with today that you feel needs to be said about healing conversations?
If we're going to find peace in this world, if we're really going to travel on our spiritual journeys, it's really important to stop, take time, go into our hearts, and really connect with other people. You know, we most of us know in our heads conceptually that we're all one. But it's not until we start really hearing the essence of the other person that we recognize that oneness. And healing conversations is one way of doing that. There are so many, but healing conversations is one way. And if we use them, we can just make this world a better place.
Find out more about Healing Conversations Now at joanchad.com.